has two aspects. Donald Trump, Prime Minister Modi, spoke in their third phone call since India was targeted with high tariffs for importing Russian oil, even though India is not the largest, not the only country. But this happens at a time when Trump has green-lighted more military aid to Pakistan. Now let's make one thing very clear. India's ties with US are far more nuanced, multidimensional and consequential, and most certainly not limited to Pakistan. But how Trump treats Munir is important, since this is a year when India and Pakistan also had a massive military face-off for the first time since Kargil. Now, as things stand, Modi and Trump spoke on closing a trade deal after Washington said that they received the best offer from India till now. There is an expectation that a trade deal may be closed by early next year. And that would put the focus on some of the other aspects of this relationship which have been sort of put on the back burner till now. Security, geopolitical, all factors that are important but have been on the back burner. That includes a Quad summit as well. That has been delayed and would probably be back on the table the moment the trade pact is finalized. And most importantly, the Trump-Modi call comes just a week after President Putin was in India. His first foreign visit since he met Trump's trusted envoys, that is Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, to look at an end to war in Ukraine. It didn't happen. There was no agreement after 5 long hours. India is the only country with direct lines of communication with both sides, which you need to have to end any conflict. And that makes India extremely vital to any peace process. Now, how does this all add up? From trade to Trump's Munir love to the larger equation where India is now an extremely important aspect is what the larger India-US equation is now all about. And let's get in a voice from DC to talk more about this. Allison Fedirka, who's Director of Analysis at Geopolitical Futures, joins me to talk more about how the call is so important right now and the larger takeaway. Allison, we in New Delhi feel that this call is extremely important. It really sets the pace for the talks. How is DC viewing this?
It is not an uncoincidental timing in terms of both the U.S. trade talks with India and also because it comes on the heels of Putin visiting India as well. Of course, the U.S. is going to say that it was a positive conversation. That is going to be part of their negotiating strategy with the trade talks that are ongoing. And also, politically, they're not going to admit, in the case of India, if things aren't going well.
Specifically, if one were to talk about trade talks, there has been some progress, but it's been almost incremental. How do you see that?
So as you point out, there are quite a few differences between the U.S. government and India. And what I think that DC might be starting to realize now is that I think they have underestimated the hand that India has to play in the relationship with the United States. I think India is in a better negotiating position than DC originally thought when going into these trade talks with them. They have many different options, and New Delhi has different options in terms of Russian partners, Southern cooperation partners. They're not as dependent on the United States as I think Washington would like to think. And they have enough clout and power in their own right and size that when it comes to negotiating with the U.S., they're one of the few countries that can really engage the U.S. and make demands as well as Washington, as opposed to simply having to go along with whatever D.C. asks because they're dependent on the U.S. relationship.
Mm-hmm. That's a very important point you're making. Does that also mean that some of these sticky issues will be resolved now quickly after D.C.'s realization about New Delhi's options?
I think that they can be resolved on a superficial level with an agreement that is quote unquote good enough. There are some fundamental points where Indian and national interests and US national interests are going to clash. And neither country is in a position where they are going to want to give in or compromise that national interest. I'm thinking primarily in the area of tech, in terms of AI development, tech advancement, tech innovation. These are areas where the U.S. wants to become the leading dominant world player. That's reflected in the national security strategy that just came out. But India is also a leader in this field in its own right, and also has its own ambitions to be one of the dominating forces and leaders in that tech AI innovation field. So neither one is going to want to bend on that. It is in both of their national interests to kind of pursue that independently. So with things where they don't necessarily have competing interests, they can cooperate perhaps on good energy deals or some sort of technology share with mining or critical minerals. But when it comes to key priorities for the future, those sticking points are going to remain. And so what we're going to likely see is something that is progress on the points that they can get along with and good enough, or working past the sticking points to the point that they don't have to necessarily come to resolution now, but they also will not be removing the long-term conflict that will likely remain.
Which brings me to ask the final question around, Allison, the kind of progress that the governments are making, the two sides are making. What about the larger India-US relationship? There are voices in Congress who feel that it isn't achieving any of its potential, and something as recent as the last couple of days, those voices, and all of them are, of course, Republican-leaning voices that are saying that.
The government-to-government talks are just one part of the picture. I think especially in the United States, private business is also a major player when it comes to how the U.S. government engages with different countries, especially in the case of India. As we've seen, the H-1B visas and the extension for having to get through the interview process is really putting a lot of people on that visa in a compromising situation and their jobs at risk. And that innately involves private companies in the United States. And how are they going to react? Are they going to save the jobs? Are they going to pay the extra fees, the higher price, I should say, for the H-1B visa? Are they going to get rid of the jobs? So there's going to be, especially in the US and also to an extent in India, the private sector has a voice in these talks in terms of their own interests and what are they going to have to give up, or how is this going to affect their bottom line? And so the governments will be receiving that pressure internally from their own constituents and their own private companies, which will eventually be reflected in the government-to-government talks. But there's still a lot to hash out in the private sector that needs to be done before the government-to-government talks can fully be conclusive in terms of an agreement.
All right. Thanks much, Allison, for joining us. And on the issue of H-1B and immigration, I'm going to come to that in just a bit.